In the morning of July 6, 1535, a young man trudged along the chilled corridors of Bell Tower, a fixture of that infamous stone fort along the Thames in London, and built by the Normans some 500 years earlier. He was a bearer of bad news to an old friend. Having reached his destination, he wrestled for a key, turned over the lock, and stooped into a cell. His eyes locked onto a figure in the corner, where a thin, 57-year-old man with a long gray beard sat and returned the visitor with a smile. Hardly conscious, the man rattled off a message to the prisoner. His execution was to take place at 9 o'clock that very morning. He also relayed instructions that he should keep his last words brief and that, in the king's kindness, his family was granted permission to attend his burial. To this order, request, and favor, the prisoner responded with genuine gratitude to His Grace, Henry VIII. He explained that death would free him from the many trials of the world and lead him to the face of God. The request for brevity liberated him from making a lengthy speech, and the permission of his family to be at his funeral was actually a comfort. At that, the visitor wept, and for a few moments, the condemned comforted the condemner. That same irony took place a few hours later, atop a nearby scaffold, where, after remarking on his good service to the king but God first, and praying Psalm 51, the same prisoner forgave his executioner. And he even tipped him with a joke, saying, "Let me lay my beard over the block, lest ye should cut it." The axe fell, and the pilgrimage of Thomas More came to an end. Today, June 22nd, the Church remembers this tower of a man among the English martyrs, those who lost their lives by living their faith. They stood against their peers and prevailing society in an age where much of Europe was moving away from its Catholic roots. Put simply, this group of martyrs, beginning in 1535 and continuing for a century more, refused to take an oath that gave all power, temporal, spiritual, and ecclesial, to the English crown. Taking it would deny the authority given by Christ to Peter and his successors in Rome, and meanwhile express support for the disordered rule of the king and parliament over the church in England. There's really a lot we can learn from this man. For more, the faith was not just a fashion or a crutch in difficult times, or something that changed along with popular opinion. Instead, the faith was an all-encompassing reality, and it guided everything in his life. It spurred him to take his call to be a father over his family seriously, and with love, and so he personally saw to the education and faith of his 3 daughters and son. It motivated him in his pursuit of knowledge of the world and justice in the courts of England, and his quick wit and exact judgment launched him to the highest appointed political office in England, that of Lord Chancellor. It gave him a marked joy that was infectious among his many friends, and a humor that stayed with him beyond his last moments. It instilled in him an honesty that even the king endowed, but later had to extinguish. When it came to matters of faith, there was no compromise with anything less and more. Even at the loss of his wealth, because he was forced to resign his office at the end of his life, his lands, which were forfeited to the displeased king, his reputation, in the last years he was even denounced publicly and socially untouchable, and his family, from whom he was painfully separated during this imprisonment in the Tower. His outlook was supernatural, and he saw with the eyes of faith. It is true that in all seasons we're called to care for this world and to bring about a society of charity and peace. But we must not mistake a utopia on earth for heaven, which is our true homeland. More puts it plainly, a man may very well lose his head, yet come to no harm, yea, I say, to unspeakable good and everlasting happiness. That echoes the promise of Christ, that he who loses his life in this world will, for my sake, save it. We're called to do what good we can in this world, depending on whatever our state of life might be, but we can never forfeit our love for God and his commandments, the ways in which he calls us to live, because one day we will come face to face with him, and a perfect and final judgment will be made on our lives. With his family, with his work, and in his isolated days in Bell Tower, Thomas More saw this future encounter with the Lord, and he spent his life, as he would put it, busy and laboring to love him, who loved him first and on the cross. Knowing that we have been loved in the same way, may we continue to walk our pilgrimage with more integrity and a true supernatural outlook. St. Thomas More, pray for us.